Well, welcome back, everybody. We are on the 32-meter azimuth, and we're going to continue our talk about signals and what to do with them. We're joined by Danny Murphy from MPI. Danny, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We're on board at 32 azimuth in Pompano at Marine Max. We'd like to thank them for having us on there. The boat is brand new. It just arrived. Actually hasn't even been fully commissioned yet, so we're doing that this week as well. So glad to have you.
Interesting you say that, because what happens in the process, let's talk about that quickly. So when they spec out the products that are going to be on the boat, they go to you, you guys put the equipment list together, you make sure that it all marries up properly,
Right.
You send it to Azimuth. Azimuth does the installation, they do all the hardwiring, and then it comes back here to the States, and what happens when it gets here?
Right, so we pre-program it before we send it, set everything up in our shop. They install it to our drawings and specs, and it gets here, and our team gets on board and just makes sure it's all working. It's all programmed to English. Everything's communicating the way they're supposed to. Everything's working seamlessly from internet sources coming into the boat to the rooms, and make sure everything's working exactly how it's supposed to be.
Like everything else in the electronics world, you have to make sure that each component is talking to the other components that it's supposed to in the proper language, with the proper sentencing, and giving it the exact experience that you're looking for.
Exactly.
For the owner, for the charterer, for whomever is going
Right.
to be using the products. So what you guys put together as a package and send over to them, a lot of it isn't seen, but some of it is seen. Why don't we go over to the rack and
Sure.
let's see what the components are that you guys have put in
Alright.
this boat in particular.
So on these azimuths, we like to do a lot of audio video, a lot of audio, streaming audio, and it's all programmed to spec with MPI's communication with the factory, and then once it gets here, we meet with the owner and we make a few changes, programming things, labeling different rooms and Wi-Fi names and things like that. But for the most part, all the equipment stays the same.
Okay.
And on this boat, they have one main rack that has almost all of the AV equipment that you ever need to get to. There are sonos behind the scenes, there's access points behind the scenes, and there's one small rack in the master just to kind of displace it a little better.
Okay, like sub panels for electrical, for example.
Right.
Okay.
So, like you said before, with different signals coming in the boat and blending it together, we use a product, essentially a network switch that's selectable, manageable. You can set up load balancing, failovers. So if you have your Starlink coming in and it's not in range or not getting signal, it'll switch over to cellular. Or
Well, that brings up a point that we talked about in our previous segment. So one of the ways that we can put all the signals together is in a product called a blender, which is
Right.
essentially a digital switch. And what it does is it takes a signal from, help me with this, Starlink.
right,
It takes it from PetWave, which is G5 or 5G, excuse me, right?
Right.
And then we also have a satellite signal that it can bring in as well. Now that particular product will parse the signal and bring it in, and it makes sure that you always have a good clean signal for whatever AV product it is that you're using or communication product.
correct.
There are other digital switches, you guys provide them as well, but where our conversation is here is what do we do with that signal once it comes into the boat?
Right.
So as you mentioned, you got a KVH, which is yet another source.
Right.
You know, you could have a small wire antenna plugged into the back of a unit for your FM
Yeah.
signal, right? I
Right.
mean, you've got a variety of different ways to get it in. What do we do with it? What good is it to us once it gets here? So we've got a couple of different things to consider. We've got audio and video in the entertainment side. And then on the communication side, we have audio and we have, well, we can have video too as well by streaming internet or by working over the internet, but we also have communication. So where we start here is primarily AV type,
Right.
correct?
So yes, and the number one and most important question we get and request by customers is internet. They want to leave the dock and feel like they're at home, watching the same shows they watch, listening to the same music, communicating with work. So it comes in through maybe a KVH
If I can't watch
VSAT.
Ted Lasso, I'm not going on
Exactly.
my trip. Is that the point?
Right, exactly.
Okay, all right.
So it all comes in, and then we manage it in our switch, and we meet with the customer on how they want to use their internet. If they want to pay when they're using it, or they want the most inexpensive way to use it until you need to step up to satellite.
Okay.
And it's all automatic and fails over. Sometimes we put a manual switch for people that like to actually physically know what they're doing.
Okay.
But once it's in, we distribute it. On this boat, audio is through Sonos. So it's a hi-fi system, it's all wireless. There's a radio, so you can bring in Sirius and FM and distribute it through the Sonos in each room, or you can stream from your phone. There's a music server, so you can load all the music you want on it, get it on the boat, and now anywhere you are, your phone, your TVs, any location in the room, you can play what you're used to having.
Okay.
And it's all distributed. All of the Sonos and access points are all hardwired. So anything that's on the boat is hardwired, so you don't ever have a failure with connection.
So you don't have to worry about Bluetooth, you don't have to worry
Right.
about Wi-Fi, anything is done through a Cat5 or a hardwire connection.
Exactly. There's Cat5 ran all over the boat. There's
An
big
HDMI
switches here
for-
spreading it all out.
Okay.
Right. And as you can see, this boat has DirecTV. So these are balins, essentially extend the HDMI signal, so you don't have a DirecTV outside on your aft deck or on your flybridge.
Okay.
So it extends a signal via Cat5, and they have signal on their TVs.
Okay.
And then any device on your boat, laptop, iPad, phone, connects to the boat's Wi-Fi.
Okay.
And it's
And
spread
where's
out.
the router for the Wi-Fi? Is that
So the
is that
router's in
hidden?
the secondary rack underneath near the galley.
So we have a couple of them on the boat,
Right.
to make sure that you've got extenders and you've got strong signal everywhere.
Right. So there's access points running off the router.
So that brings up another piece of the conversation that to me is interesting, and that is whenever you've got internet signal and you've got communication, security is going to be a consideration. We've got a variety of different ways that the signal can be used on the boat. We've got the crew, let's say on a boat of this type, we've got crew and they've got their needs.
Right.
And then this boat in particular may be put into a charter marketplace, or it may be for private use only.
Right.
So those bring up three different scenarios for the use and security considerations of our internet signals. Right. So how do we first, let's just say it's a private use boat, how do we first maintain autonomy or segregation for the signals in the boat between crew and owner experiences?
So it's an important question to make sure we get right. In this boat particular, the crew has a separate network running off of the internet source. They have their own router.
Separate password,
Separate
completely separate digital system.
Correct. It's completely standalone from the rest of the boat. The only thing they do share is the internet source coming down. But after that, the crew cannot log in and see the owner's cameras, email accounts, passwords, anything like that.
Okay.
So that's security that way. Moving in the charters, we usually split up the main router and make a guest network. You can manage that on how much bandwidth the customers can have. You can measure it to know if you're billing for bandwidth or you're just billing for a package.
Well, that's incredibly important too.
Right.
Let's say we're in a remote location, we're in the Virgin Islands, and we're using some of the satellite
Right.
services in order to provide streaming, and the charter guest has got 4 children
Right.
with iPads, and they all want to be doing whatever kids do on iPads these days. There's a lot of streaming going on there. There's a lot of bandwidth used.
Right.
So you can dictate how much bandwidth they're allowed to be used.
On that part on the guest network, you can limit that to whatever the agreement is between the owner and the charter.
Okay.
You can have it unlimited. Some charters do just charge flat rates, but for the most part, it's monitored and kind of charged.
Is there an
based
ability to
on the-
monitor how much
Yes.
bandwidth is being
Yeah,
used
and
so that you
at
know
any-
at the end of the charter, you guys use this much?
Yeah, so you can manage it through the router and see what you're using daily, or you can manage it through the blending switch that we spoke about earlier. That also shows your data that's coming through, where it came from, and how much you used.
So it's like having an electric meter on the side of the house. You take a
Basically, yeah.
reading when you get there and take a reading when you leave, and
Yep.
you know how much was used and you can bill accordingly.
Right.
Okay, so we've got security, which allows the crew to utilize a separate system entirely, and then the owners to use a different system, and we can parse that owner's system out to be password protected for charter guests,
Right.
and only allow them to use a certain portion of it, and you leave the other idling for when the owner wants to use
Right.
his boat, and that's
Right.
his access point. Okay, so it's pretty much all managed through the rack, through the system that you provide to Azimuth Benetti in this case. They do the installation, and then you do the update and management of the system when it gets here,
Correct.
activating subscriptions and so on.
Right.
Okay, so where it goes from there, obviously, is out into our user experience.
Right. So every room is set up similar. This room has a TV and a Sonos soundbar. It's got surround speakers and subwoofer under the couch.
Okay.
It all works together.
Right.
Whether or not you're using Sonos function, like people think they need internet, you don't need it to use it as an entertainment system.
Okay.
The only time you need internet for the Sonos is if you're streaming music.
Right.
But every room we make work the same way, so it's the same experience if you go from here to the master to the aft deck. It can all be managed iPad. It can all be managed from your phone, or they all have, let's call it a universal remote.
And it's what we've all become accustomed to, and that is a home theater experience
Right.
isolated into each different area.
Right.
So you can be doing one thing here with the same signal and this switching. You can be watching a football game here, and you'll be watching a movie in the master stateroom, and you could be watching cartoons
Right.
in the guest
Right. They all have Apple TV and Smart TV. That's what everybody's using at home.
Okay.
Usually they're watching Netflix. So with the owner, they can basically stream unlimited depending on the plan they have coming in through the switch.
Okay.
And like I said, for charters, it can be managed.
So, Danny, let's have a seat and tell me, you deal with the customers calling into the shop all the time,
Right.
the people that are actually using the systems. What are the top questions or challenges that you're faced with from the customer service side of the phone calls?
The top question is internet, like I said. That's the number one request now. I think the biggest reason for the boom in the last couple of years, on especially boats of this size, is people still need to work, and it needs to be seamless. So you can't be out in the middle of the Bahamas and relying on cell data, because you have to video in, talk to your
Well, you
companies.
can, but you better be making a lot of money.
Right, exactly. So there's ways. I mean, everybody talks about Starlink. That's our number one thing right now, and it's making it easier and easier.
Starlink really has changed the game
Right.
because it's a new product. It's a new way of communicating and delivering the signal to whatever devices you need, and we see that it's far more cost effective than the traditional or older systems, which are still very much in use. But Starlink really is changing the game in a lot of respects. And another point that you bring up, which is super important, is that a big driving factor in the explosion in the boat business these last few years has been the ability to work remotely that COVID kind of brought to our attention.
Right.
But if you can do it on the boat from the BVI or from Nova Scotia or from the Seychelles, nobody else is the wiser. So if you can do it in a cost-effective manner, seamlessly, it changes the game.
Yeah, and I've actually had surprising, during the last couple of years, I've learned a lot because some of the owners of these boats have, large companies with full IT teams, and they basically spec out what he needs to have, and they communicate that to me, and I've learned a lot about products and making them better because of that. So it's kind of worked both ways, because some customers have told me they're not going to buy the boat if they can't be connected all the time. So it's extremely important, and like I said, I've learned too because of these teams of IT companies for their companies telling them what they need, how they need to be secure, and I learned from there. So.
Well, as we all learn, and that's the purpose of all of this,
Right.
is so that the brokerage and yacht sales community that's catering to the owners can learn from these segments the different things that the owners are asking for, the depth of knowledge that you need to know about each of these different products so that you can deliver a great experience to your buyers. Danny, I think that pretty well wraps up what it is that we needed to talk about today and what we do with the signal when it comes into the boat. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Oh, wait a second. We're going to have to figure out something else to talk about because I don't think either one of us gets paid enough to go out in this kind of weather. Let's go back and talk about safety. So Danny, one of the things that occurs to me is that while we've spoken a lot about communication, AV, connectivity through the internet, through the different signals, one of the areas that we really do need to focus a little attention on is safety. Because with all this connectivity, it gives a completely different dimension to our ability to operate safely than we ever had before.
Right.
For example, through internet connectivity, I mean, look, we're all used to having radar and GPS at this point, and we can see a local storm coming, but your radar is limited to maybe 72 miles. What's it going to give us to have the kind of connectivity that we're talking about in the ability to forecast weather further out so we can do more route planning, so we can provide a better experience for our owners and our clients?
Right, so it allows the captain, the owner, whoever's running the boat, to go out and look past what you're seeing on your Sirius forecast 3 days. A lot of people are familiar with Patch's Weather using an app. You can get 10 days, 2 weeks, and it's also instant live too if you're making a crossing. The Sirius a lot of times is delayed. As you said, radar only lets you see so far. So it's live, always changing, and you can see far long distance. It's time away. And on top of that, routing, you can you can plan your routes, plan your course, and it'll all be downloaded onto whatever app you're using that's internet-based, and it can sync to your chart plotters on here when you go to move the boat. But it gives you a lot more freedom. You can do it outside the boat, at your home, at your office, and when you get on here, it syncs via the internet because connection with the cloud, and then can get into your navigation. So it's really given a lot more time is given to the captain to plan rather than sitting in front of the wheel and doing it all here in short forecasts.
Well, and something that used to be available only in the commercial sector and maybe to the big yacht marketplace was weather routers and planners.
Right.
So today, a boat like this has every capability of traveling long distances. And while you may not want to run 22 knots.
Right.
If you're running at 10 knots, you're only making 240 nautical miles a day.
Right.
So a trip to the Virgin Islands is going to take you several days. Consequently, weather moves, and you can deal with your route planners. And if there's a change in the weather, a stall or a speed up of a front, your route planners can get the message out to you if you're properly connected and help you to deviate course, lay in at a port, speed it up so you stay ahead of the weather,
right.
Whatever the case may be. So safety isn't just about fire prevention and firefighting, deploying a life raft overboard, doing a man overboard drill, all the normal things that are incredibly important, but our internet connectivity and our ability to communicate enhances the safety in the operation of the vessel as well, thereby making it even more attractive to those people that aren't accustomed to it. When we can add a different element to the ownership experience and to the boating experience, it puts them more at ease.
It really does. It gives a lot more confidence. They're not leaving with the paper saying the weather's good in 2 weeks and it's changing, obviously. They can look at it. Everybody's comfortable using their phone. Everybody's comfortable using the iPad with apps for the weather, and it's changing constantly, and people are used to that. And it takes away, you're less scared to leave because you're never actually disconnected.
Again, what it does is it makes the experience virtually the same as that experience that you're accustomed to at home or in your office.
Right.
You are completely connected, and you have the ability to glean all of the information that you want to have at your fingertips. It's there whether you're on the boat, in your office, at your home, and it's a seamless experience.
Right.
I think safety was something important to point out because it's something that we don't focus on first when it comes to, or we don't recognize first when it comes to our connectivity.
I think that's true. You don't think about it. And it goes even past weather and navigation. It goes into cameras for security.
Right.
If the boat has internet, you can see it. You can sleep knowing your boat's fine at the dock. You can monitor crew. It really helps with safety.
You can monitor systems in the boat too. And
right.
I mean, we've done segments on systems that monitor float switches, and it will tell you how many gallons per hour your bilge pump may be pumping, and you know that it's you have a water intrusion, or a system is failing, or an air conditioning inlet hose has failed and you're pumping water into the boat. There are a variety of different monitoring type systems that are important that we're able to now monitor from anywhere because of these connectivity
Right.
issues.
It's all logged on board, but you have no way of knowing that unless it's connected and you can see it. So
yeah, we don't really like the salvage guys to give us that chip
Exactly.
and tell us what happened.
Right.
We'd rather be proactive and fix
Exactly.
the problem first.
Yeah.
All right.
So.
Very cool. Well, yeah, safety is an important element that we hadn't talked about before. Thanks.
Thanks.
And that's a wrap for today. Yacht Engineering Week 2023 has been brought to you by our title sponsor, Pantropic Power, the local cat dealer, and our anchor sponsor, Robert Allen Law, the business of yachts. We would also like to thank our segment sponsors, Lürssen, Viking Marine Exhaust, Zemos, Marine Data Solutions, MPI, Bradford Marine, Ditech, Lewis Marine Supply, MPT, Tropic Ocean Airways, Ward's Marine Electric, Seabob, AquaBanas. We'll see you again tomorrow, 9:30 sharp.